Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters, cousins and friends, colleagues and allies, as has become a very popular phrase recently. Welcome everyone to the first in the Black Equity Organisation listening series. The series goes to the heart of the BEO approach to addressing racism and racial inequality, believing that to lead, we need to listen. The issues that need to be addressed should be decided by the many and not the few, and the answer should come from the people with experience and knowledge, not just from leaders at the top. And everything that BEO does should be fact-based. The webinar will focus on barriers to economic success and what is needed to overcome them. We'll be hearing from community leaders, business owners, startups, and entrepreneurs who have experienced challenges to accessing finances to start and grow their businesses. Research from Extend Ventures showed that just 0.24% of VC funding, that's venture capitalist funding, between 2009 and 2019 went to Black entrepreneurs. So that's just 0.24%. And even more shockingly, only 0.02% went to Black female entrepreneurs. The British Business Bank has also conducted research that showed that entrepreneurs with an ethnic minority background typically have higher educational achievements than their white British counterparts and invest more time and money into developing their businesses. A Black individual starting their entrepreneurial career is not doing so on a level playing field. All the stats point to that. So what can we do to level the playing field? That's the question we're going to be asking today. We have 3 representatives. Well, currently we only have 1 representative from the BEO on the webinar today. And their primary job is not to talk, but to listen. But active listening also can involve responding when necessary. And so the active listener might chip in every now and again. So the person who's currently on the webinar is Rick Lewis, who is a BEO trustee, a British businessman and founding partner of Tristan Capital Partners, a British property investment firm. He's also the chair of Impact X, which funds Black, Asian and ethnic minority entrepreneurs in the UK and Europe. Hopefully we should be joined by BEO chair Dame Vivian Yvonne Hunt, and we'll also should be joined by Timi Okua, who's the BEO director of partnerships and programs. I will talk about them more if and when they join us. Now that they are listening, or Rick is listening at least, we also have an amazing panel of Black British and Black entrepreneurs in Britain today, all from different levels and from different experiences and perspectives. Right, they are Joel Blake, OBE. Joel is also president of the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce and a non-executive director. In 2019, he was chosen as one of the top 50 most influential Black voices in UK and tech. We have Dr. Elsie Zakan, which I'm sure I've mispronounced. How do I pronounce your name, Dr. Elsa?
It's Zakang.
Zakang, thank you. Apologies. A senior consultant at Guidehouse, a life science strategy consulting firm. She is an entrepreneur with a vision to implement change in the biotech sector and was recently featured in Forbes Africa, who named her a science entrepreneur. We have Gunan Adamu, sorry, Miss the N is silent. Gunan is an international multimedia trainer and award-winning and an award-nominated entrepreneur for her social enterprise iWoman Academy, CIC, and she is a fellow of the School of Social Entrepreneurs and Wellcome Trust Grant Awardee. We also have Andy Ayim, MBE, founder of the Angel Investing School with a vision to empower a new generation of angel investors. His career has seen him move from consulting venture capitalist VCs in San Francisco to democratizing access for diverse founders in the UK. And as if on cue, last but not least, we have Monique Laguerre. I can see her name, I can't see her face yet. But Monique is also a partner of Cornerstone Partners, a UK angel investor network established to invest in businesses owned and run by Black and diverse founders. With this focus, pardon me, Cornerstone Partners aims to increase diversity in business and remove barriers to funding for individuals and backgrounds from an underrepresented background in the UK. I'll be asking all 5 of them, welcome Monique, some basic questions and their views on Black British barriers to economic success. I will then be opening up to questions and comments from the audience, and Rick, who is representing the BEO, as an active listener, please feel free to chime in anytime that you would like. You may want to ask your own questions as an active listener. So let's start with the first question to all 5 of you. Real basic one to start off with. What do you all see as the biggest barrier to economic success? I'm going to start with you, Gunan.
Oh, why, Marcus?
Your top left-hand corner on my screen, that's why.
Definitely, I mean, the hard part is the society that we live in, because I genuinely believe there's a lack of trust in the Black community when it comes to banks investing in us. Because I remember when I first started, and there was always a reason, and sometimes the reason didn't make sense whatsoever. And I remember Chuka Ramuna back in the day, must have been about 6 years ago, wanted to kind of investigate some of the banks to find out, you know, why there was such a low level of investment in Black businesses. Because a lot of the banks were saying, well, they didn't see race, there wasn't a problem with ethnicity, blah, blah, it was about business plan. There was loads of excuses. And Chuka Ramuna wanted to look into that, but I don't know how far he went with it before he more or less left politics. So I think the barriers definitely is lack of finances and lack of investment. I always tell this, so I remember I put in for, when I first started, like a 10 grand loan. Wasn't even like a grant, a 10 grand loan, and I got knocked back for it, and my credit was fine. And I never ever got the right reason why I didn't get that £10,000 loan, you know. So a lot of my successes come from investing in myself and using my own capital to get to where I am, to be able to then show examples of why, you know, and why other grants, well, why funders should fund me and etc. But I definitely think it's the lack of trust from certain organisations, certain banks to invest in Black businesses.
So we're seeing a lack of trust. We're seeing excuses, which in your mind don't seem to properly add up. Excuses that don't add up. I'm going to just jump in and say that that's what we normally call racism. And you're saying that you're having to find your own capital to invest it in yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Andy, is somebody, what do you think are the main barriers? And I'd be curious if you could address because I know that you've looked and you advise venture capitalists.
Absolutely.
As well. So what do you see as the main barriers? And if you could also address some of the points that Gunan made.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll split in terms of internal and external barriers. I think externally, like when I started Mixtape Madness with my brother and a few friends 13 years ago, we had no clue what angel investors or VCs were. So we had no choice but to bootstrap as a result of that. And, you know, Black people, we're resourceful. We're born into this country. We make a lot with a little that we have. But actually, it's really difficult to compete with competitors who are well-funded, putting money into marketing, hiring great talent, and you're there trying to make a lot with a little. And that's a challenge. It becomes a challenge to even compete in a market if I'm not able to raise funding in certain markets that you're operating in. I think some of the internal barriers sometimes is that imposter syndrome that we sometimes have, because we haven't necessarily got a mentor to help us with the social mobility of getting into a network or getting into a certain space. If I look back at when I graduated at university, I had a particular mentor called Francis Mainu, who was Ghanaian like me, supported Arsenal, I supported Manchester United, but we got on. And he's the one that translated for me what a management consultant is, or an auditor, or a transactional. Without him, I wouldn't have got the job. Without him, I wouldn't have got into this opportunity, even though I was capable. I think a lot of our entrepreneurs are the same. They're very capable, but we need to teach them the language and how to operate in the rules of engagement in the game of entrepreneurship, because it isn't common sense. And sadly, like without that foot up, sometimes we can be a few steps back. And another example actually was when I actually got into Ernst & Young, some of my peers were inheriting wealth from their nan, like a house. And some of them quit work within like a week and joined a startup. And by the time I first worked for a startup, they were on startup number 3. So they had learned the vernacular, they had developed the network, they had developed the talent networks, and they were starting their business. And they could tap into all of this capital resources and knowledge that they now had while I was starting from a different basis. So we need to recognize that when tailoring solutions for our community, we can't give that blanket approach of everyone has access to the same, because it just isn't true. And that goes back again to the systemic racism that you touched on.
So there's issues of generational wealth and being able to access that generational wealth as well, is what I'm hearing, if they're borrowing money from their grandparents and what have you. And then also making sure that we have mentors, we have people that be able to guide us through some of the very specific issues, and even just the language that you need as an entrepreneur. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And not just generational in terms of wealth, but networks. Like if my dad didn't work at Goldman and my auntie didn't work at McKinsey, there's a lot of stuff that I've got to figure out between that. So it takes time to break into those networks and to understand the rules of engagement in the corporate world, let alone in the startup lens. And I'm sure the likes of Monique and Rick and whatnot could touch on that a little bit more. And it's actually great now in modern times that we have a Cornerstone or an Impact Tech, so these funds that are set up specifically tailoring solutions to our community.
At this point, I'd like to go to Rick, but I'm not going to go to Rick because he's actively listening. But I'm going to go to Monique. But Rick, feel free if you want to jump in after Monique. Monique, I'm going to come to you to address some of that access to VC and capital. Although that's a bit of a tautology, VC capital, to VC funding. And what you think are the main barriers to economic success for Black British people.
Thanks, Marcus. We actually produced a report back in 2020 that looked into this very thing. And we found that because most mainstream VC providers are a homogenous group, so typically they are white males who are looking for males to invest in. And so what we do at Cornerstone as a group of 20 Black partners, we have proactively gone out to the market in order to find Black founders, exceptional Black founders to invest in. And, we've had no problem finding fantastic companies in which to invest. So each year we get about 300 to 400 companies coming to us looking for investment. There is clearly a demand there that we can satisfy as angel investors. On the other side, I would also say, because like Andy, it is very much about exposure and knowing, how to network, but also maintain that network, having people send opportunities to you. A lot of the time when you're a young Black person starting work or maybe starting in business, you don't have those networks available to you. And so I think that's part of the challenge. So the two main things that our report drew out was the fact that, it's mainstream VC industry not being diverse enough and therefore not having the capabilities within that industry to identify different types of founders. But then on the flip side, on the founder side, just about founders not necessarily having the knowledge that they could gain access to VC funding.
Okay. Now, Rick, you are a BEO trustee. It's meant to be a listening session today for Black Equity Organisation. But it's the first one, so we're finding our feet as to how these sessions are going to work. And I could see that you were dying to come in off the back of Andy. So please go ahead.
I think I want to be helpful wherever I can, and I think the question of networks is a really interesting one. I think that we are, as a people, and we have to use the widest term of that because we're all kinds of different people, but we are entrepreneurial and we're resourceful, but I think we're still learning how to network. And what we don't understand is how to network as well as I'd like to see us network amongst ourselves. We don't trust each other with our most valuable resources, which is our integrity, our word, and our, the really precious one, our capital. We think that we want to do great things, but then we're pretty miserly when we're going to joint venture with each other because we haven't learned to trust each other. But we're looking to the majority population going, you should trust us, but we're still learning how to trust each other. And when you go and ask somebody to get into their network, I mean, I'll play someone that gets asked that a lot. What I want to know is that if I open my network to you, you're going to do the same for other people. That's the incentive that I need to know is going to happen. It doesn't have to be right away, but it can't be, we're really good at asking for things, but we're not really good at getting together on things. Not like you've got something that's really good and valuable, cutting somebody into it so that they start to feel like, wow, I just got brought a gift. And so, I'm going to go repay that gift by bringing that network 3 more things. We're doing some of that. We're just not doing as much of it as I see in the wider global population, majority population, and that's the deficiency and that's the growth opportunity for us as a community.
Okay. One thing which I want to bring in, my son has just come to the background and thinks he can't be seen with his bow and arrow, but that's fine. One of the things that I just want to bring in, Elsa and Joel, is specifically about tech, because often when we talk about, entrepreneurs, tech is a big issue now. So I was just leaving, I hadn't forgotten both of you, Elsa and Joel, but you're both, but I thought I'd bring in the tech issue. So are there particular issues with regards to tech, access to venture capital, or other barriers that you see are holding back Black entrepreneurs in Britain?
Sure, I'm happy to start there. I think going off the sort of segmentation that Andy did, which was internal and external, which we've already talked about. Starting off with the internal factors. So for example, I have a PhD in infectious diseases, but I come from a home where my dad is an MD scientist, my mom is a pharmacist. Achieving going into STEM at the level that I have was almost expected. It wasn't far-fetched. So there is that knowledge and that being able to have access to that knowledge in the tech sector, that is definitely very key. But then on the external side, I'll share a specific experience whereby in 2019, I was part of a startup. I was a designated pitcher, and we got to pitch at the Palace, which was the Duke of York's initiative, to shine a light on entrepreneurs in front of the likes of Sir Stelios, founder of EasyJet. And I remember pitching, and I mean, obviously lights, camera, action, and all the nerves, and finishing to pitch, asked for clarifying questions. There were no clarifying questions. We were not shortlisted, which was fine. Asked for feedback, and the feedback that we got, because there was someone in the room that we sort of knew, was that, oh, the panelists just didn't believe that you could execute. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what does that mean? You just didn't believe we could execute. Was it the product? Was it the team? I mean, at the time, the platform was an HR tech platform, and we had one of our first angel investors was the founder of Monster Jobs. And I mean, that speaks for itself in terms of his years of experience. So I was thinking, at what point did it fall through the cracks? And also, why was a clarifying question not asked? So when it comes to the tech sector, I think there's obviously quite a few different things there. So there's the technical capabilities. There is that unconscious bias, if you want to call it that. There's that lack of belief in what we're able to achieve. And I have to admit that I'm pitching as a Black woman. So there's the intersectionality of it, as well as even thinking that, well, okay, I have a PhD. Okay, fine, it's not in tech, it's in science. But again, it should show that I'm pretty smart and being able to grasp knowledge and information at a pretty wide level. So there's that aspect that even if we come to pitch, even if you have the opportunity to pitch, are you pitching in a safe space? Are you pitching in a space where you'll be able to believe, like I think what Monique mentioned about what Cornerstone is doing, obviously that's exceptional. And what I hope that BEO can obviously go on to do is creating that space where Black entrepreneurs in tech, in science, in the biotech space, on whatever may not be traditionally considered as Black founded companies can be supported within that. So that's what I should.
Okay. And Joel, it would be great if you could come in now, because I think you were, I forget, you're one of the top 50 tech entrepreneurs in the UK. can't remember who you. I'm just trying to scour my notes in UK Tech in 2019. So I'd be curious if you'd be able to answer that. How difficult has it been for you to make your way in the world of tech and access to VC funds?
It's interesting because I think, you know, that award was nice, but it also showed there's 49 other people who are doing great things in this space. So going back to Rick's point about the collective, it's about that unity and that sense of collective power and leverage that we do have. But in my day-to-day, I run a tech company, fintech company called the GFA Exchange. I founded it because I was fed up of the lack of inclusive access to finance opportunities for underserved SMEs, and in particular, Black founders. But I was once part of the problem. You know, previous business, I set up a financial lending firm, and we had to follow the protocol like many other lenders around credit risk, around collateral assets in order to benchmark opportunities against. And we just found that many people, including, you know, people from our community, didn't really fit that profile. And so I thought that tech could make it a little bit more inclusive. And unfortunately, we've been able to prove that as possible. But what I see now in the both local, national, and global world is that there seems to be a bit of a convergence of three things that's happening where tech is playing a huge part. We've got diverse data sources that allows any business to evidence their value and evidence their capability to be a successful business. And COVID has certainly decimated the way in which traditional lenders and investors used to look at businesses. They can't look at historical data anymore. So there's now an opportunity for Black businesses who are credible and can deliver to showcase how they can do that. But it's for the sector to really look at Black businesses and look at what we do and look at our data through a much more unconscious bias, much more less biased eyes, and give us a fair crack of the proverbial whip, in that sense, in terms of looking at our businesses for what they are. You know, it's about healthy growing businesses, not a business that fits a profile. I think the second thing is that diverse data enables everyone to get new diverse intelligence. But that diverse intelligence is still often biased if you're using narrow data sources. So again, you know, if lenders and investors are not thinking about their data sources, their intelligence that they use to make decisions are also going to be biased. But then the opportunity that we have is that tech kind of democratizes all of that because it enables you to be much more innovative about how you use that intelligence. And so I think as Black businesses, we've got the opportunity to showcase our businesses more than ever before. But like all colleagues have said, there are the barriers and the challenges that stop us being able to do that all the time. And I certainly found that in my early start in my journey where I was looking for funding, similar to yourself, Gunnar, and I went for funding that was less than 10K and I didn't get it and I didn't get a response. So I thought, okay, well, how am I going to do this? So I just got an extra job and tried to find ways of making money legally, but in order to bootstrap myself and move forward. And so the inherent entrepreneurism that we have in our culture, that's part of our DNA, that's part of our resilience, going back to Tulsa and well before that. But the reality is that we're living in a much more modern world where data and the insight from data is going to drive a lot of decision making. So we as Black businesses need to be able to make sure we've got our numbers right, we make sure we've got our strategies right, we make sure we can evidence our impact. You know, when we're pitching from an evidence base that is commendable, that is credible, that no one can really challenge, so that we can go back with that data and evidence and insight to those very same founders who say we don't fit their box. You know, the way I look at it is that the rules have changed, so whose box is it?
Yeah. So, I mean, from what I'm hearing that is, and it's not my job to tell BEO what policy they should be rolling out, but it's definitely from what I'm hearing, and this is a listening session, is that possibly we should be exploring different metrics, that we need to research different metrics because the current metrics that you were talking about sometimes disadvantage Black entrepreneurs, that whether a project is deemed viable or not viable. Am I hearing that correctly, Joel?
Yeah, and sorry, look, to be slightly controversial about it, we all already know the challenges of histories. We're not talking about problems that are just yesterday. You know, these are historical challenges for our community. And even the data reports that have come out have highlighted things that arguably we would already know, although we probably didn't know the exact numbers until those reports came out. So the reality is that there needs to be a want to change from the industry, outside of our own who are making the change, who are tailoring solutions. The mainstream industry needs to want to change, and therefore want to look at metrics, want to be able to change their own processes and systems. And so we also have to give them the evidence and the business case from practical examples of impact to show them why that is. And I know that organizations are doing that, but we need that more happening more at a much more stronger level and at a decision-making level within these organizations too.
Okay.
Marcus,
Now,
can I just add to what Joe just said?
of course.
Because a lot of us who are entrepreneurs, you know, you study, you research, you read, you watch things, and it's constantly learning. You don't stop learning as an entrepreneur. You know, they keep on telling us that, you know, you need to know the rules, to break the rules, to bend the rules. But actually what happens, especially for the African Caribbean community, is a lot of us now are understanding the rules, we're understanding the language. So then things start to change now. So like Joe said, you know, the industry needs to want to change to allow us to be part of that melting pot. But actually what will happen, and I predict this now, is in the next 5 years, things will change again. We're having to fight again, which means we have, as a community, we have to, like Rick said, we have to invest in each other and not always looking for, you know, white-led organizations to fund us. We should be in a position in the next few years to be able to fund ourselves. And, you know, and because I know there's different organizations who are doing this now. There's a lot of, Black philanthropy is on the rise, but I definitely feel that in the next few years, this is a discussion that we need to look at, is within our own community. How do we invest rather than looking elsewhere? Because you will find that within the Arab community, the Indian community, the Jewish community, they are successful because they invest in themselves, you know. So yeah, I see Andy smiling.
So Andy and Monique,
Monique was first. Monique was first, actually.
Just,
so
before I come to both of you, this is just people who might have come slightly late. This is a listening session.
Because I put my hand. Sorry.
Just saying that this is a listening session for BEO. So we've got 3 representatives from the Black Equity Organisation. Rick was very punctual, so I introduced him. Timmy Akua and Dame Vivian Hunt was slightly later. So I just want to introduce, just so people know who they are on the panel. So we have Dame Vivian Yvonne Hunt, BEO Chair and Senior Partner at the consulting firm McKinsey. She was also named as one of the 10 most influential Black people in Britain by the Powerless Foundation, and one of the 30 most influential people in the City of London by the Financial Times. And we have Timmy Akua. Timmy is the BEO Director of Partnerships and Programs, leads on engagement, fundraising, and income generation. She is currently working with Sky and BEO's advisory group to set up and deliver the F100 Growth Fund program. So welcome, both of you. What I also said to Rick and everybody else is that part of listening is that we are actively listening. And so please, if you feel the need to inject or talk, sometimes responding is part of active listening. Just so feel free, Vivian and Timmy, if you want to also join the discussion. Monique. Oh, sorry, Vivian.
No, Monique.
Thank you, Vivian. I must say, I think Andy's probably thinking or saying the same thing that I'm saying. Now, Cornerstone, and I agree, we have to come together and invest in each other. I think Cornerstone as a angel investment network is exactly what we're doing. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to raise the profile of Cornerstone, especially if people aren't aware of Cornerstone. We are based in London, but we have UK-wide footprint. So we do look at, entrepreneurs that come from the north of England, from Wales, so I think if there's anybody on this call that is looking for investment and wants to be invested in from a group of 20 Black angel investors, they definitely have to, speak to me or speak to Andy, because there's lots of opportunity out there. I think it's just the matter now of finding them, because, many people are pulling together resources and actively working together to make sure Black founders have the funding that they need. Cornerstone actually one of the most active investors in Black and diverse businesses in the UK, and 3 of the partners are actually in the process of launching a VC fund that will provide this investment on a larger scale to businesses. So there's lots going on. It's just getting information to people. Thank you.
That's great. Just to remind everyone, thank you so much, Monique. Just to remind everybody who's listening that we do have a Q&A button or section, and I will be coming to questions afterwards. We've had a few really interesting questions which I will be going to, but feel free to type in, or not feel free, please type in any questions that you might have. Now, while Monique was answering that, Andy, you raised your hand and then lowered it. Timmy, you raised your hand and lowered it.
I was just making you aware that my hand is there, yeah.
Okay, your hand is there. Would you like to?
Absolutely. So, firstly, for anyone that's listening that doesn't follow me on LinkedIn and he's an entrepreneur, you really should, because I share so many funding sources, and I share when anyone has grants, when there's any opportunities like the BEO's Sky program, I share that stuff very punctually on LinkedIn for free. So there's access to information if you're hungry and you trust the sources of these information. And once you go through my LinkedIn, hopefully you'll build some credibility and trust to know that I'm a trusted person providing this information. This is an ecosystem problem, and Joel, you started touching on it actually, and it's really important that we actually explain this to the audience, because if you look at the flow of money, okay, we have these limited partners who are investing into VC funds. They are influencing who is getting that money at those funds. Those funds are majority white middle-class men who run those funds. In time of pressure, in time of filtering between what deals am I looking at and what I'm not, they are often turning to introductions from founders in their portfolio or investors that they know well. So when we're talking about the network piece, this is the network that we're trying to break into, which is actually a closed network. Because who's making those introductions? I'm sharing deals to some of these investors and myself because I'm now on the inside. But this is really important. When we talk about democratizing access to opportunity, we need to democratize access to those networks. On the angel investing front, that's the primary goal of the Angel Investing School. We've trained 300 professionals now over the last 15 months, 70% people of color, 55% women. Like, I've invested alongside like Black women and Black men in the last 3 deals that I've done. Ava Estelle, a cream company that cares for like eczema and hyperpigmentation, is due to make 10 million in revenue this year in its 3rd year of operations. Like, we have incredible Black entrepreneurs doing incredible things. And luckily there's opportunities for us even to write small tickets of 2,000 to 10,000 pounds to club together, put our money together and to back these entrepreneurs. So I'm doing that actively in the deals that I'm doing, but I'm not enough. And that's where I think your point is so true around actually how can we really scale our impact and get more of the community to act in a way of trust, to not only just leverage our capital, but leverage access to our networks and access to our knowledge so that we can really work as an extension of the teams of these founders that we're backing.
That's great. And I will definitely, I don't follow you on LinkedIn, but I'm going to correct that straight after this. And I see that Gunan has put some Twitter feeds and some other links in the chat bar, so people feel free to cut and paste those. Timmy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it was to say hello, and sorry I was a bit late. There was some technical issues, and to say thank you to everybody who's joined to share their experiences. I think I come at this with 2 perspectives. One is in which many 10, 15 years ago, the Cornerstones and the Andys and the Joels, you know, they weren't really as, you know, in terms of the critical mass that we have today. So that's really gratifying. And as we, BEO, launch the F100 Growth Fund, which is a partnership that we're developing with Sky to support 100 Black entrepreneurs over 3 years. We'll be providing them with access to funding, and then also providing them with some training in terms of how you access supply chains, because again, that's another big source of funding for Black entrepreneurs. So on the one part, I'm really gratified that, you know, we have this critical mass that we're developing. But I also echo what everybody else has said, is that there is an issue around the people that make the decisions about who gets the funding, from the VCs who have a very, you know, I would say quite narrow view in terms of the kind of businesses that they want to invest in. Typically don't like to invest in lifestyle businesses, where, you know, you find a lot of Black businesses. Don't like B2C necessarily. So I think there's a lot of work that we probably need to do to reach out to those guys and, you know, do a bit of listening with them and educating, you know, with them as well. And I think also working with the banks. So a lot of the high street banks have closed down, you know, a lot of the, you know, a lot of their branches. So, you know, going in and getting, you know, the training and support that you would need if you wanted to access funding, understanding what the criteria is, how you prepare to improve your credit worthiness, I think is quite key. So whilst there's a lot to be really happy about in terms of how things have moved along, there is no one silver bullet, I guess, that will help with fixing this. So I'm really interested to hear what the panel has to say. And then also in terms of the Q&A, BEO is really, we're really passionate about this area. We think economic empowerment is a very key cornerstone for us, and we're in this for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The question I have for all the panelists is, we know that we're talking about Black British entrepreneurs, or Black entrepreneurs based in Britain. Are we thinking too small or too large? Should we be thinking when we're accessing the markets that we're going to, or accessing the VC funds, should we be thinking nationally, locally, relatively small, internationally? Should we be thinking about our diasporic links? So I'd be curious as to how we should be approaching that, because I know that we've got people with links to the Caribbean, people with links to the continent, you know, so whether we should be thinking nationally, locally, internationally. Now I'm going to pick on Joel first, just because he's got his hand up. So I don't know if you were going to answer this question, Joel, or want to answer another one, but I'm picking on you first, Joel.
Could I answer that question in two parts very quickly? I think what Timmy just said is spot on in terms of the banking sector. Certainly that's our primary client market, what we do at GFA. And what we're seeing with banks is that a lot of their processes have not been built or designed to assess higher risk that they don't understand. So there's something around ensuring that the evidence base that we provide as Black businesses as a community aligns with some of their processes, what they look for as well. And so there's an education piece for the banking sector, not just a kind of almost an oppression against them in that regard, because a lot of them just don't know, but that is not an excuse either. And what we will see is a bit of retraction to what their normal lending patterns and investment patterns have been historically over the next 5 to 10 years. But that's a whole different economic argument. In terms of your piece around diaspora, so with my Commonwealth Chamber hat on, so within that role, I look at how we connect UK businesses to businesses across.
Can you just remind me what your Commonwealth Chamber hat is?
So I'm president of the Commonwealth Chamber of Commerce. So it's the only Chamber of Commerce in the UK dedicated to bilateral trade between UK businesses and all 54 Commonwealth countries. So there's a primary focus on our top 10 trading partners, and but a number of those organizations, particularly about our community, are based in Africa. I think there's 22 different Commonwealth countries in Africa alone. And so when we look at diaspora, 100%, you know, going back to Rick's earlier points around networks and connection, let's be very clear. We live in a global world. And what I mean by that is local, but global. Our community is global. So when we look at our businesses, we shouldn't be looking at our businesses just to serve our community next door or in the same area. We have a global community that we could work with and leverage from and support and uplift. But sometimes, arguably, our mindset is just trying to do the best that we can with the things that we know we can support in our immediate vicinity. Yet, if we could think about the global mindset and how we can engage our communities abroad, we already have an ecosystem that should, over time, we continue to work more closely with. We've got a bit of a leverage base and a platform to create even more economic growth for ourselves. I'm seeing that in that particular role. You know, when I talk to peers abroad, they're looking at, well, what's the narrative from the UK? What's the offer from the UK in order for us to work more cohesively with the UK? And they see UK as the whole. Our communities, yes, but UK as a whole. And so there's something around How do we engage with our own communities abroad to then showcase the value overall that we can bring to all cultures and communities, but making sure that we are, investing in ourselves and getting the benefit for our own communities first? Because if we don't do that, we're going to operate in a world that's actually we're going to isolate ourselves whilst trying to operate in a world which is inclusive or needs to be more inclusive, or indeed we have an opportunity to show how we can be much more palatable to them. And I say that from a place of positivity and strength, not a positivity of deficit and victim. Because as far as I'm concerned, everyone else needs to deal with the power that we have as a community, but we also might need to educate in parts to make them understand how to do that effectively. And we already have a global community that we can leverage to do that if we have better ways of structuring our approach to different communities, with our communities abroad, make sure policy and systems are right, make sure that our governance models are correct, making sure we've got effective measurement of the impact of the work that we do with each other abroad, because all this adds to the collateral of being a global community that works. And that's the key, it has to work.
Elsa, are we thinking globally enough? Are we not focusing on our local communities? Global, local, national? What's your view on that?
Thank you for the question. I think obviously I will definitely echo a lot of what Joel has said in two parts. One, second part of the funding that we got from the HR tech startup that I was part of was from an accelerator based out in Graz in Austria. And so again, is that whole global, local communities. But then at this point, I probably would turn it back to probably Andy, Monique, and everyone from the VC investment community in terms of the terms and conditions, because something that we faced there was the terms and conditions were not particularly the most favorable for us. Yes, it provided access to the funding, but then the way the funding was distributed, what we were allowed, the sort of red tape around the funding sort of became quite complex for us. And then COVID hit and then that put in another dimension. But also, secondly, I am part of the Africa-Europe Foundation, which is an organization founded in combination between Friends of Europe, bridging that partnership between Europe and Africa, the European Commission, and Africa-Europe Foundation was founded as well by Dr. Mo Ibrahim. And there we're looking more around policies and how do we write or rewrite policies to make sure that access to funding within these two continents really are equitable. There's the power play there that is really not, which is one that is mutually beneficial. And so it's really how do we look at tap into these all different organizations and these different initiatives that are being funded, that are being formed. But then what is the legal, the policy backing, the T's and C's around it that protect entrepreneurs as we act locally but think globally. So I'll end there.
Can I add to that, please?
Please.
So my younger brother, he's got a podcast called Unlocking Africa, and it's all to do with UK. So he interviews a lot of businesses that are either based in Africa or work in Africa. And you know, and what I love about it is that, I mean, I'm bigging up my brother, but what I do love about the people that he gets on is that, you know, for a long time, people were scared of investing in Africa, or had this notion of what Africa looks like. And, you know, but actually, I know so many people before COVID, Black businesses who moved back to Africa, whether it was Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, they moved back because they weren't getting the opportunities in this country, you know. But also when you do decide that you want to go back to Africa, your mindset has to be different as well. You can't go there with this English mindset. You have to actually go and study and understand how businesses work, understanding tax, understanding treaties, understanding policies, you know. And this, I mean, there's loads of underhand things as well that, you know, that's another conversation, but understanding the culture of where it is that we're working. Why I've always thought, as an entrepreneur, always think global, not local, and looking at getting inspiration from our African and Caribbean brothers and sisters. You know, even I used to go to Atlanta quite a bit. And when I used to be in Atlanta at least once a month, and going over there changed my mindset completely. You know, seeing Black entrepreneurs, investing in Black entrepreneurs, was seeing the lifestyle, seeing the businesses. I used to come back thinking, what am I doing here? you know, and even though, you know, I must say they don't have their struggles, they really do have their struggles, but actually going over there as a, you know, a black, I hate saying the word black British, as a Nigerian Scouser, and just talking to them and just seeing the enthusiasm, and they were listening, you know, and I just thought, yeah, I'm missing the trick here. So I've always thought we need, as Black people, we need to think globally. We're not meant to be local whatsoever. It's not in our DNA as Black people to be just local, you know. So yeah, we always have to think bigger.
Andy, Monique, do you have views on this before? I'm going to go to one of the questions. We're getting some great questions in from the audience. So do either of you want to add to that before I go to a question in the audience?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm a third generation Vincentian. So my parents came to the UK from St. Vincent. My dad, entrepreneur, he runs an offshore trust company in St. Vincent. My brother runs a management consultancy business out in Bahrain, and my sister's an entrepreneur. She is in London. So we are very entrepreneurial, very global people. One point Dr. Elsa had mentioned was the kind of support that we provide to entrepreneurs and the kind of terms and conditions that Cornerstone offer to entrepreneurs. Now, as an investor, the money that I'm investing is my personal money. So when it comes to that, I have to do a certain amount of due diligence and make sure that I am comfortable with, you know, businesses that I'm investing in. The businesses that we invest in, we offer them commercial terms. So, you know, it's supposed to be a commercial arrangement whereby it's a commercial arrangement whereby, can you still see me? There seems to be. Okay.
Yeah, we can still see you.
It's a commercial arrangement by, you know, terms and conditions of that contract be abided to. And so we work very closely with entrepreneurs that we invest in, providing support. As I said before, we're a 20-strong partnership, and so people within that partnership have different skill sets, and we all kind of chip in to make sure that, you know, get the support that they need to run their business. So we provide strategic support, a network, and introductions to other firms, or, you know, introductions to banks or organizations that can support with, you know, businesses' financial requirements. So I think Andy had touched upon, you know, certain entrepreneurs may require support with working capital, or, you know, getting help with financing, that kind of thing. So we will provide those introductions to those entrepreneurs. So it's not just an investment, it's actually investment and support.
Okay, one of the questions, thank you so much for that, Monique. One of the questions that we got in from Patricia Brown is, I have a sense that the US is ahead on this. Am I right? And if so, what lessons can be learned? So that's coming in with what Gunan was saying about Atlanta. And we have a great, more of a comment, very short comment from Pat, which is Atlanta is Wakanda, which I'm assuming is less that they are battling rhinos and trying to stop a Hamlet overtake of their kingdom, and more that it is a nirvana of Black entrepreneurship. Now, I know we've got quite a few people with experience of America, so it'd be good to know what people think are the differences, what we might be able to copy from America. Gunan, you might want to go first. But
actually, Andy's
okay, Andy, you want to go first on this one?
I feel like I have to say ladies first now, just because I feel like you had something to say.
Go ahead, Andy. It's all you.
So I lived in San Francisco in 2015, and it was an eye-opening experience for me for 3 reasons. The first is that this philosophy of the American dream is fascinating, because it lifts the aspirations of a nation to feel like I can go from nothing to something. It's quite different actually to a more conservative traditional culture that we have here in Britain. And that makes a difference on people's ambitions and people's will and people's drive to be more and do more. The second thing is, like, we often get comparisons with the US and UK, but the Black population in the US, we're talking about like 30 million plus, is very different to the scale of the Black population here in the UK. Okay. And the third thing that's really important is that, like, when we think about like a lot of the generational wealth and what we see in the US and whatnot, there's two aspects of that that's really important to unpick. One is that the US was the primary exporter of globalization when I was growing up. So everything from sports to entertainment to entrepreneurship, I was getting fed US images, whether black or not, right? Like first for me in entrepreneurship and venture capital, it was the likes of Bill Gates, then it was Jeff Bezos, then it was Mark Zuckerberg. Then I started questioning, is there space for me in the space? Nowadays it's, okay, Jay-Z's talking about wealth and Beyonce and whatnot, but actually is US globalizing what they do? And the second aspect of that that's really important is, like, when I look at the venture capital industry and a lot of the people in the US who have got into the industry, they're ex-entrepreneurs who have been on that journey before, or they're ex-MDs of sales, people with a really commercial mindset. So they're a lot more ambitious in taking risks. So when we talked about consumer startups before and it's unfavorable here in the UK, it's not a surprise that a Snapchat, an Instagram, a WhatsApp, a Meta all come out from the US. Right? So in the UK, like what I find is a lot of the venture capitalists sometimes have a more financial services background, are used to taking calculated risks of spreadsheets and therefore look for more predictable B2B SaaS, B2B tech, you know, those kind of businesses that are lower risk. When actually that's almost an ironic concept, because the whole point here is that we're meant to be taking high risk by backing entrepreneurs at a very early stage. It's not private equity. We're talking about angel investing here and venture capitalism, which is like a sister of the industry whose sole purpose is to take that high risk at an early stage. So I think there's a lot of mental models there that we need to challenge here more as a society. And that's not just actually the Black community alone, that's more systemic in terms of like the decision makers and who's in those investment decision-making seats.
Well, so Andy, don't you think as well with the states, they're not scared of failures, as you mentioned about the risk.
It's a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor.
So if you're a business and you've never failed, then there's a problem in the sense of you've not really learned. Most business owners have failed in their first business. You can't be perfect. So there's always that conversation around celebrating failure. And I always say this around, you know, that's one of the reasons why I do love tech, is the celebration of failure. Because when you start a business, most of the time when you've started, you don't know all the answers. And I think as Black businesses, we try so hard to know all the answers that, you know, that's where we stumble. So I found that with the states, they celebrate failure. And it's like, all right, we're going to invest in you because you've shown us that you've learned from this. And that's what I really liked about them. But also, I remember my first meeting was in New York, and just the enthusiasm for my idea, I was like, no way. Because a year before, I had a similar meeting with someone in the UK, and they said to me, I don't think that would work. Why would you do that? Why would you? And I was like, oh, okay then. But because I believed in my idea, I was like, I'm going to see what will happen. Went to New York and met a few people, and I was like, oh my goodness, you know. So there's a system of building, you know, and flexibility, which Andy mentioned as well, is it's not just about spreadsheets and risk, it's about flexibility by a conversation. We don't have conversation. So a bank will look at you and just go, you're high risk, we can't touch you. Whereas in the States, you're having conversations, and you don't really, like, most conversations are like informal interviews, you know, and then they'll decide whether or not they think about investing in you. And that's not just about money, that's about their network of people as well, introducing you to the right people. And sometimes as a community, all we need is the right people, the right opportunity, someone to tell us where we're going wrong or where we should go. It's not just about money. So that's what I found with America was that. So go on, Rick.
But Guna, Rick, before you go, Rick.
I just want to bring in Rick because he's been putting his hand up. Then I'll come back to you. Right, if I can just bring in Rick.
Yeah, well, it's just a little edifying here. I mean, I take all the points and I think it's mostly correct. I don't think we celebrate failure, but I do believe, because I believe in a just and fair world, nobody goes through life without taking an L. And I think the issue in the US is it's not terminal. Here, we believe it's terminal. You're going to get one and done. So if you lose, you're up. And we're going to know we've made progress here when you feel like you can go make a pitch, don't get it, but it doesn't destroy your character, your will, your desire to try again. That's what we're trying to do with building networks, is trying to get to a place where you can go in there and get your head smashed and feel like, I'll go and do it again, because there's a real meritocracy, right? And that's what I think we've gotten to in the States, because during my time, and I'm not going to, nor is Dame Vivian going to say how long we've been doing this for, but I saw that change. What my parents went through when I was younger is very similar to what's going on here. And in a generation, it can change dramatically, you know, and you can see what it means, right? And I'm not saying it's the same culture. I just know that the breadth and depth of opportunity that I saw when I was younger is completely different to what you were just talking about and what we all experience in the States now. And I do believe that that can happen here too.
Okay, Andy, I said I'll come back to you, and then I've got a really interesting question from Lee Jasper, which I want to go to. So Andy, sorry, I'm
going to be really quick. It's both to Rick and to Gunan, because I think it's fascinating that one other thing that I experience with America is that the extremes of wealth and extremes of poverty, like they don't actually have a lot of the welfare state that we have here in the UK at the same time. And culturally, when I grew up working class in Tottenham, I felt like I couldn't afford to fail. And that's really important, because if I feel like I can't afford to fail, it's hard for me to go from that scarcity mindset to that abundant mindset that's required. So when you touched on that, like failure is a badge of honor, and that point in the US, I felt that over there, and I learned that and adopted that. But naturally, my natural gear growing up was I can't afford to fail, so I can't afford to take that risk. And if I look at the paradox of where that's coming from, it's because I've been brought up, you know, with limited resources, privileged compared to the majority of the world, but I felt like I can't afford to take that risk. I can't afford to fail. I can't afford to risk it for my family and not just myself.
We've got a question from Lee Jasper, who's in the audience. I'm just going to read it out. Given we've left the EU, are we now a 51st US state? Given the political reality, we need to think we have to recalibrate and facilitate an even closer relations with African American businesses and their business community. BlackStocks has recently begun discussions with the US Congressional Black Caucus about a range of race equity conditionalities in relation to US-UK trade deals to attach CSR and race equality demands. They are very keen. What does the panel think? And I'm going to throw this out to everybody, even our active listeners from BEO, because I know that you've had some experience with regards to this. But who wants to jump in on Lee's, how our relationship has changed to the US since Brexit? Don't all jump in at once. Joel. Joel,
sorry, Dave. You go first. Go, Vivian. Do you want to? Okay, thank you. It's not so much a US; it's much more of a Canadian piece. You probably would have saw during the pandemic there was a I think it was £200 million plus, if I'm not mistaken, amount of funding that was pushed into supporting specifically underserved ethnic minority businesses by Canada across the whole small business network, to the point where they actually started to look at legislation to make sure that funding processes within Canada were being more tailored to diverse needs. And so there's also, for me, that's showing that there's not just an acceptance, but an understanding and a desire to do better and to be more inclusive, and therefore supporting the ecosystem of business support around ethnic minority-owned businesses. And that for me was what I found fascinating about that support. It was about funding the support ecosystem, not just putting more funding into existing funders in order to ask them to fund more. It was about supporting the whole package of support. So I think closer workings with our neighbours across the pond, maybe, but I think it's much more around what's the best practices that we could use to develop our own sense of support, not just aligning ourselves and almost copying to a degree. It's more about how can we be more innovative about what we can do with what we've got here, knowing that there are best practices that we could potentially learn from. So Vivian, come to yourself, sorry.
Thank you, Marcus and Joel, and everyone, including the comments in the chat. I just want to highlight that the thing that's exciting about the Black Capital Initiative in Canada is that they did it in collaboration with their equivalent of the Canadian Business Association, so their equivalent of the CBI. And like the UK, like many non-Black majority Commonwealth nations, structural ethnic minorities and Black people are a structural minority. So this notion of how can you super serve this minority population that'll always be a structural minority. We've got much more critical mass than that. We're sort of in between where Canada and the US is. But as markets for capital, markets for our products and services, markets for our technology platforms, we absolutely should take advantage of North America and anyone who is taking an analytic approach to these things. But you should be encouraged because that initiative around capital was started less than 2 years ago. It was done in collaboration with the equivalent of the CBI, almost like built in as mandate to their Race at Work charter, now being even looked at as legislation to make sure people use the data and stick to their commitments, and significantly more institutional capital is going into the community as a result. I just want to really reflect and hear very strongly this notion of what big levers can we concentrate on in the mainstream access to capital areas, in addition to and not in conflict with supercharging our own networks and building our own businesses in which we have equity and even greater wealth development. Just taking away, Marcus, as a listener, a real strong need to think about how the BEO and this network and beyond can help in both arenas, holding everybody to account and getting as much access to those markets and capital as we can, but also building it up for ourselves and self-financing and self-referring so that we actually create even more wealth within the community. I'm going to leave Timmy and Rick to step away because I do have a call with capital financiers for the Black community at the top of the hour, but I just really want to honor and thank you for the work that you've done and really commit to continuing the listening tour so that we have big asks and expectations of capital flows, communities, and of ourselves in terms of all the things that we can do. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Dame Vivian. One of the things we haven't really talked about government policies so much, and so I'd be curious. We've talked about Canada, which was a structural intervention, and we've got a question from Jenny Garrett saying, "What do the panel think of mandating a percentage of UK business funding that must be allocated?" So I'm assuming that there might be some legislation in this with the word "must," that must be allocated to Black business and impact measured over the next 5 years. So would that be an interesting policy initiative to make sure that venture capitalist funds VC funds must allocate a percentage, or are there other government policies? Because these markets aren't forces of nature; they're all structured. So, is there any policy initiatives that we want our government to be doing?
I think one policy worth reviewing or updating is the SEIS and EIS tax incentives that we have in the UK. And what that stands for is the enterprise investment schemes. And what they are is basically a tax relief opportunity if you're investing in early stage startups. And if I, for example, invest £10,000 into Startup X, I'm able to get up to 50% back, so £5,000 back in tax relief. So the startup gets the equivalent value of the full £10,000, even though actually I've really invested £5,000. I think it would be interesting to both update that, because funding rounds are getting bigger and bigger every year since that was first introduced, but also to see actually if there's more incentives we can introduce within that to maybe give even more tax relief if you're investing into more diverse founders. I think incentives like that could be interesting to explore in terms of early stage funding.
Okay, what do people think of allocating or mandating a percentage of VC funds to Black businesses?
Marcus, I think that's worth considering. I think one of the areas that I would also really be very interested in is around supply chains, and that's one of the key focuses of the program that we're trying to develop with Sky. And they've got a similar type of thing of this in the US, where they have this 15% pledge. And I think because the access to finance, access to purchasers and buyers of massive supply chains, if we can open up those supply chains, if we can encourage more corporates, public sector organizations to review their supply chains, how much do they spend with Black businesses, what kind of demand do they see, get them to open up in that space, but have that be something that the government in an inclusive and an integrated way stands behind. I think that'd be really, really key.
Can I come off the back of what Timmy just said?
Of course.
So I did a really good research project last year. Well, it was last year, moving into this year, and I was looking at public service broadcasting and the like diversity and things like that. Now in Australia, they separate BAME from Indigenous people, because what they found was production companies would hire people who were of African, Caribbean descent or Asian, and then would say that was them, you know, they've ticked off diversity. But the racism towards Indigenous people was that bad that they had to separate them. So now the Australian Broadcast Corporation will only work with companies that have 3 to 3.7% of their workforce is someone of Indigenous, is an Indigenous person. So going back to what you said, Timmy, about that supply chain, I definitely think that should be a charter where they can, like for example, if Sky is working with any organization, they need to show that either they are Black led or 15% of their workforce is Black. So, but like I said, Australia has a charter, so they will only work with public service, will only work with production companies who have 3 to 3.7% Indigenous people in their team.
Now, thanks so much, Bruna. Now I know, Joel, you have to leave in about 5 minutes, so I'm coming to you. So yeah.
Thank you. I think totally agree on that, and I think also the other opportunity is the kind of ESG focus for businesses and organizations, particularly the S of ESG and around sustainability. I think there's an opportunity within there because there are a number of different ESG standards that many organizations are having to align themselves with in terms of reporting and regulation. But with the S part, the social aspect of that, there's a social value piece within that that certainly would align themselves well with supporting Black-owned businesses, as well as supporting the intersectionality of Black-owned businesses too, because many organizations might have different objectives that support different types of Black-owned businesses at scale. So I think within that legislation is important. And the reason why I would say that also is because increasingly access to finance and the ability to support access to finance applications, both lending, investment, and in wealth management, is going to become subject to ESG practices and your ability to report on that as time goes on. And there's a recent study by RSM that was saying that 61% of their middle market membership are looking at access to finance as a way of leveraging and supporting their ESG activity. And so it's very important to maybe think about that in the wider sense. And I think government has an opportunity, since it's still very, ESG is not early, but it's very early in terms for many businesses in terms of how to actually report on that in a consistent manner, because there are many standards and there's no consistency of the standards themselves. But if they go for this practice of understanding what they need to start evidencing, then I think the government has an opportunity to support people with evidencing their value and contribution to ethnic minority-owned businesses. And then I agree with yourself, Timmy, as well, in terms of the supply chain of that as well. And how can these organizations evidence through their ESG, how they're supporting diverse supply chain activity? So I think there's a moment in time now where that could be a real good vehicle to look at some of that.
Now, Joel, just before you leave us, you just mentioned intersectionality. And at the very start, I had that terrible statistic that only 0.02% of VC funding goes to Black women. So we will be talking about intersectionality when it comes to gender. But I just want to ask you just before you leave, because you're in Birmingham, is that correct? So I want to know about intersectionality and regionality. So I'll be coming, so I'll ask you and Gunan, you're in Liverpool, and then I'll be asking about other forms of intersectionality as well. So whether you have a view as what we should be doing nationally to address regional problems.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think regionally, we're a mirror of the national problem. You know, there's definitely a need for more support for all types of business owners, but certainly Black females have been heavily underrepresented in terms of funding. What we are seeing, though, is almost a bit of a revolution happening, where we're seeing the next generation of entrepreneurs, you know, taking on the power of a mantle to be able to evidence why they are investable. You know, there's a great number of women networks, Black-owned women networks as well, from the younger generation, who are really putting forward their case for business and getting funded and getting support that they require. And I'm seeing, you know, the banking industry in particular are looking at some of that space as well, in terms of how they can really delve down into grassroots and support female entrepreneurs in particular from our community. That being said, I think there's also a wider piece around just diversity full stop, and what is it that we need to do as kind of representatives of our organizations to use our power to try and force change. And I think we are doing that in the best way that we can. And I think intersectionality would just be part of the ongoing conversation, because, you know, we haven't even talked about, you know, disability-led owned businesses, for example, or even Black, female, disability, who might identify as lesbian. You know, there's so much levels of intersectionality that will have an impact in many, many different ways. So I think we just need to support the whole area of inclusion full stop, and make sure that inclusion is supporting our narrative, whether it's Black female, or whatever other characteristic that we're bringing together, really.
Gunan, do you have any, being in Liverpool, do you have any perspective on regionality, or is it just, as Joel was saying, it just mirrors the national picture of, you know, levelling up, being outside of London is just tougher?
Oh no, it definitely is. I think, as from my experience, a lot of us, I mean, I've known Elsa for a while, in the entrepreneurial community, and, you know, Liverpool, I mean, we're just, what, 36 minutes away from Manchester, and I think Manchester is still way ahead of Liverpool. You know, we have our organisations, but a lot of us have to go outside of Liverpool, have to come to London, have to go abroad. So there's a lot of, and that's to, not just for support, but actually just to get inspiration as well, and get the right advice, and get the, you know, and get the right mentors. But also, I think the sad part about all of this is that Black women are, when you look at figures, we are entrepreneurial, because we have to be, you know, in so many different ways. And there's just no correlation with how many of us are entrepreneurial with the investment that we get. And that's from startups. So, you know, I'm loving listening to Monique and Andy. But from a startup level, I know how hard it was for me, and trying to find the right advice, trying to find the right networks. And, you know, we have the women's organisation in Liverpool, which is fantastic. But I wanted Black female entrepreneurs who could guide me, you know. So there's a lot that a lot of us in Liverpool have to do in terms of finding the right support, but having to leave Liverpool to even get any opportunities. So I think it'll be interesting maybe after this to continue the conversation with Monique and Andy around when you look at angel investment, is it mainly down south? Are you actively looking in Liverpool or Manchester? How is it looking in the north? And see, because I do feel like north and northwest, we kind of get left out sometimes.
Okay. Does anybody, Joel, I think, is saying goodbye to us rather than wanting to make another comment. So thank you so much, Joel. Does anybody else want to jump in on intersectionality, or otherwise I'm going to ask, go to some of the questions, because we're having just so many questions. I'm literally just tip of the iceberg on the questions which are coming in. So, Dr. Elsa.
Sure. I think obviously following on from what Gunan is saying, the way I look at it as well is drawing from maybe some lessons that have been learned through the STEM, leveling up the gender inclusion within STEM, and that's really coming from representation and coming from that community and familial support. And that's something that I think has been quite underlooked, and really hope that that's something that we can pull through within the startup space and investment space, but more so at scale. I think I was listening to the launch event of BEO, and I think it was Dame Vivian Hunt who said, trying to bring community together at scale and intergenerationally. And I think that that's something that's massively missing. And it really rang a bell with me, because there are quite a few different organizations in different places up north, down south, doing different things. But being able to bring that up to a higher level, whereby we can obviously learn from the lessons of the past, but also building on the ideas of the future. And like it or not, there is a different level that comes when you're dealing and engaging with women. I think like Gunan was saying, where you want to have that inspiration and having that representation from a woman who has perhaps achieved and broken certain barriers. So this is probably the two things I'll probably mention on that.
Okay, brilliant. I want to go to a question, being a bit selfish, because I'm a father, and there was a question that actually just comes in which absolutely resonated with me, which is from Michelle, who's a parent and L3 youth work practitioner. And her question is, how can I, as a parent and youth worker, support young people start developing these networks that we are all talking about from an early age and expose them to beneficial opportunities? So how do we build up those networks, that social capital, I guess? Who wants to jump in? I am desperate to know. My son almost crept in at the background, so I need to know. I need to know this answer. What should I be doing? Monique.
That's a fantastic question. I think back to when I first started work over 20 years ago. I started called Rathbones, and to this day I still speak to my manager. Not obviously not every day, but every so once in a while I catch up with my manager. So it's about making sure that the people who supported you in the early stages of your career, or even, you know, just people who you know, have given you some kind of advice, try to maintain, retain contact with them. Send them a Christmas card every year. You know, if you're working on something that might be of interest to them, share it with them, because people are often invested in your kind of development. If they've mentored you in any kind of way in the early stage of your career, they will most likely want to hear from you, and they will enjoy hearing from you, and they will then put you forward for opportunities. So one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing was working in the boardrooms of large corporates, and what I saw a lot of the time was you know, people around the board table will often say, bring such and such into this meeting, or add this individual onto the board of a subsidiary, just so that they can get the exposure, just so that they can get the experience. And so that's what we need to be encouraging in our younger children, to make sure that they have that exposure. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I actually said to myself the other day, it's all about exposure. So if she has that exposure early on, if I take her to museums, if I develop her mind and ensure that she's as creative as possible, she will be curious. She will want to know about different things, and I have to facilitate that somehow. So I think it's just making sure that you encourage curiosity in your children, and then making sure that they retain and maintain their networks. So you might think that, oh, it's just my old manager, but actually, no, that old manager has a network, and that old manager might want to put you in touch with someone who can offer a job, or who will invest in your business further down the line. So never lose touch with good people is my advice.
Okay. Andy, you got your hand up to answer that question.
Yeah, I'll share 3 quick stories, and I really resonated with what you shared, Monique, actually. The first one is, like, I posted yesterday, I was awarded by HSBC and the UK Black Business Show, one of their top 25 Black entrepreneurs. And in my post, I mentioned that if you can't see it, you can't believe it. It's so important for us to raise up our relevant role models, and to highlight them, and to give them a platform, and to let people know that they belong in a space too. And not only do they belong in that space, but they can succeed in that space. Because a lot of us growing up used to doubt whether there was space for us in an industry if we didn't see others that we could relate to, or others that are like ourselves. The second thing is, it takes a village. I grew up in Tottenham, which is super multicultural, where I could get yams and plantains down the road. But we had this mentality where everyone was my auntie and uncle. And therefore, in all of us, it's like what Rick said at the beginning, all of us have a responsibility that's shared to each one teach one. You know, and everyone even watching this call has an opportunity to do that with others. Like, what's the small thing you can do to impact and open a door, to provide an opportunity, or to share some knowledge or access to a young person within your network? That's nothing phenomenal. We can all do that. And then the third and final one is, and I hope these stories resonate, by the way, is like feeding your curiosity.
They're resonating, Andy. Don't worry, they're resonating. Feeding
your curiosity is a hidden superpower of us as Black people. Okay. When I was 21, I went on a trip to South America, and my friend said, that's not a Black thing to do, you're going to get killed. I didn't die, and it was a great thing to do, even though I didn't see many Black people on that adventure. It was an eye-opening experience. And the reason was because through feeding our curiosity, we take an active interest in being an active participant in whatever we're learning. So as children, I've got a 5-year-old now, she's actively interested in animals. I'm going to take her to as many animals as possible so she can feed in that curiosity. If she wants to keep watching Beyonce and dancing as she sees her on the TV, I will foster that curiosity and dance along with her. And I think we need to do that more, to actually just feed their curiosity and be a sponsor who's actually helping to feed their curiosity. So I think that's something, again, all of us can do, even those that are listening in today.
Timmy, you had your hand up and then lowered it.
Yeah, it was just to indicate that I wanted to say something. Yeah, and Andy really subscribes to all of what you said there. And I think what I would say in addition, which we've referred to earlier, is that we've got to make it okay for Black children to understand that you will often fail, you'll get things wrong. It's not the end of the world. You can pivot and do something else. And I think another thing that I would also say is that not everybody finds it easy to network. I think sometimes, for instance, on the program, we're going to do some training around networking, because sometimes I know that when I'm meeting somebody, I'm thinking, actually, what is the purpose of this? What do I want to get out of it? And you've got to be quite intentional around how you do your networking. And as Monique said, in terms of staying in touch, making sure that you keep your networks vibrant. And I think the last thing that I'd also say is that we all have networks. We all have people that we know in different sectors, in different areas, and finding ways in which we can connect each other within the Black community is quite key to that.
Thank you. Gunan.
Yeah, so two things. So when I was younger, I remember my dad got me, I stole my dad's Olympus camera and I would take pictures. This is in senior school, and I would take pictures, develop them, and then sell them individually for like 10p. And I made the killing from doing that. And my brother used to sell sweets, and ice lollies and things like that. So, within our household, we were encouraged to be entrepreneurship, even though it was against the school policy. We got into trouble, but still my parents never said, oh, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that. They just said, don't get caught. So we were fortunate enough to come from a Nigerian family that was like that. But also as parents or even guardians, I think it's conversations that we have in schools as well. So I was fortunate enough to go to a secondary school who had a teacher who encouraged entrepreneurship. So we were part of, there was only 12 of us, but we were part of an entrepreneurship team that created candles, and then we had to take them to like an entrepreneur championship. But not that many kids put their hands up to do that, So I think it's our job as parents to find out from teachers as well, what are they doing in terms of creating that entrepreneurial mindset, and how can we support that? Because I think it's part of it can be part of PSH as well. So, but the network part of things, I think that's really important. I'm still in touch with so many people that I've met along my way from school. Even when I was starting my business, it was my old lecturer that I went to for advice, and then he put me in touch with someone else who put me in touch with someone else, and and the rest, as they say, is history. So I think it's allowing our children to for one to be different and seeing it's okay to be different, because I was a bit of a geek and a weird kid. But no one my parents said it was okay. But also, not like Timmy said, it's if you're an introvert, how do we support our children who are introverts? Because not every child can go there and network and talk to people, but they've got some amazing ideas. My 11-year-old loves animation. And he can sit there for hours doing animation. I haven't got a clue how he even found out how to do it, but I allow him, whereas I know some of my friends will say, oh, we shouldn't be on it. You shouldn't be on that iPad for so long. But actually, he's creating something, so it's looking at that gift that our kids have and saying, how do we support them to the next level? And find the ways that we can find them, do our own research and finding ways of working with our children, because I'm a very academic. My son is very animated and creative, but I've had to learn that maybe he might not go to university. So how do I support him if he doesn't? So I'm learning from my child.
Yeah. So I'm going to come to you in a second, Dr. Elsa, but I just wanted to ask Rick, in terms of, even though you are actively listening, but I just would be curious as to whether you have any reflections on how things might change or differ, rather, between how we approach entrepreneurship for children in the UK versus how we approach entrepreneurship and the teaching of entrepreneurship compared to the US or other parts of the world?
I think that there's a number of initiatives underway, and I think each and every one of us has to figure out sort of how we link to some of those. I mean, a lot of us are already involved in them. In addition to being there for our children and our relatives and the people around us, if we really want to grow the bench strength, the people that believe that there's a meritocracy, that believe you can take an L, that believe you can go in there and create something and don't have fear of failure, we're going to have to involve ourselves in these. So what I always say is try to figure out what little thing you want to do each day, every day, to help build the village. I was smiling when Andy was talking about it because there's some of my basics, figuring out what your personal superpower, curiosity being a great one. My grandmother always used to say, it takes an entire village to build one single point of greatness. And if you believe that, then you don't have the luxury not to help out. You really have to figure out sort of like, and it doesn't have to be 10% of your time. It doesn't have to be everything. But outside of your own personal interests, your family, the people you love, what is it that you're going to be willing to give and do to help build the village? Because we can't say we want it to get better if we're not willing to put ourselves in that uncomfortable place where we give that piece. It doesn't have to be a 10th or a 10th at church. It could be some small thing each and every day that we link to make this happen.
Thank you so much. Dr. Elsa, in terms of what should we be doing, what should we be teaching our children to foster those networks or an entrepreneurial spirit?
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I don't have any kids yet. So I think for one thing that I found very useful and which I currently do as an advisory board member at the Science and Industry Museum, again, my background stems, I'm obviously biased towards that. And it obviously highlights on a few points that Gunan, Rick and Andy have already raised. But it's flipping on the other side and seeing how are our museums able to tell stories that are inclusive, how if you were to bring in a class of young kids that go into a museum, are the stories that are being told, one, being reflective of what scientific innovations have been made? Number two, are they inclusive? Do they see themselves being represented in those stories? And those are the things that I really challenge being on the border, ensuring that it's representative and open to the community so that members of the community can feel like they're able to come in there and actually be inspired. And obviously just listening and finding points of interest, whether that's taking them to an art exhibition or whether that's painting or allowing them to dance to Beyonce, as Andy was mentioning, and just fostering that curiosity. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we've almost come to an end, so I'm going to ask everybody, and I should have warned you about this beforehand, but it looks like, well, not looks like, we will have a new Prime Minister. Who knows who that's going to be? So I'd be curious if you could just say one sentence to that new Prime Minister. What would be the one thing that you'd want that new Prime Minister to know? What should be the message that you'd want BEO, when we're sitting down at 10 Downing Street, to be telling that new Prime Minister to help Black entrepreneurs? So I should have warned you, but you have no warning. And because Gunan, you're laughing, I'm going to pick on you first. So what would be the one thing you want Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak to hear if we sit down with them to help Black entrepreneurs?
I'm going to steal what Timmy mentioned before around that 15%. I think there should be a charter created that says that a certain percentage of investment goes to Black businesses, whether it's startup, trade up, scale up, it has to go to Black businesses. So
okay, great.
Timmy,
sorry. Dr. Elsa? One sentence.
Our community, build our communities, providing the space and the funding for us to actually build communities.
Okay, I'm going to come to you now, Andy.
I say work with a close convening partner like the Black Equity Organization to meet people where they are.
Okay, I've got a feeling that answer is going to go down well with the active listeners there. Monique?
Yeah, I think I'd say create funding schemes that provide support to organisations that are already investing in Black businesses. So yeah, it's similar to Andy's, I suppose.
Okay, and Rick and Timmy, you do not have to answer the question because you're meant to be actively listening, and you can just shake your head if you want. So I think Rick has dodged that.
I do have one. I think for me, it is to get Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, whoever's successful, is to work with the FCA and the banks to collect data on how much debt financing goes to Black businesses. We don't collect it at the moment, so we have to do lots of research. We need to have the data coming directly from the people who lend the money.
Okay, and with that, thank you very much. The person I want to thank as well, who we've just seen as avatar as BE on screen, is JK, who once again wonderfully convened all the panelists, did all the hard work behind the scenes. So thank you very much, JK. Thank you very much for all the people from the Black Equity Organization, and thank you to all our panelists. I'm only 2 minutes over. I think that's a success for me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.